Marcus Webb was 39 years old, and for 11 years he had been the kind of man his wife never bragged about to her friends. He drove a burgundy pickup truck with 140,000 miles on it and a cracked passenger mirror he kept meaning to replace. He wore Carhartt jackets to church, packed his lunch every morning, and Danielle's friends called him Plain Marcus at her girls' dinners, a name she smiled at instead of correcting. What they saw was a man of modest dimensions, a structural engineer with a state salary and a joint checking account that rarely climbed above $4,000. She had confirmed that impression on a cold December morning when she stood in the bedroom doorway with her overnight bag already zipped, her voice carrying the flat certainty of a woman who had rehearsed this moment for longer than she would ever admit. She said she had a lawyer, and that he should get one too, that she wanted the house and a fair division of their accounts, and that she had spent 14 months deciding what fair looked like from where she was standing. She had moved $63,000 out of their joint accounts in 19 carefully paced transactions before she said a single word. What she did not calculate, what could not have fit inside the plan she and Trevor Holt had been constructing together, was the holding company registered under his grandmother's maiden name, or the 7 rental properties it owned outright, or the commercial construction contract for $1.8 million that had been awaiting his signature for 11 days. What Danielle would not understand until a Thursday morning in a Dilworth conference room was that her sister Simone had tried to tell Marcus everything 18 months earlier, in the parking lot of a Harris Teeter on a Wednesday night in October, and he had thanked her and not believed her the way she needed him to. He had almost paid for that with everything he had spent a decade building. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The Saturday before everything became undeniable, Marcus was on his back porch sanding the corner joint of an Adirondack chair he had been building for 3 weeks. Cedar shavings curled onto the concrete and drifted toward the steps, and the November light pressed thin and amber through the pecan tree his grandfather had planted in 1962. Marcus worked without music, without anything except the grain of the wood and the particular resistance of the joint he was trying to get right. He had learned early that the finish on a piece of furniture told the truth about the patience of the man who made it. His grandmother May had said that to him when he was 12 years old, standing over a birdhouse he was rushing through in her backyard in Greer Heights. Don't hurry a thing you want to last. May had been gone 4 years now. He still heard her most clearly when his hands were working. He had built the back porch himself 8 years ago. The deck boards were Brazilian ipe, laid on 16-inch centers, and they sat as level and tight as the day he finished them, because he had taken the time to get the substructure right before he ever thought about what anyone on the outside would see. That was how Marcus Webb approached most things. The visible part was always the last consideration. Danielle appeared at the back door around 10. She was dressed for brunch, a blush-colored wrap dress, hoop earrings he didn't recognize, a leather bag from a brand he couldn't place. She leaned against the doorframe instead of stepping outside and watched him work with an expression he might once have read as warmth. He had been studying that expression for almost a year, and he knew better now. He had known better for a while, the way you sense a load-bearing element beginning to shift before anything visible cracks. Not a sound, not a symptom, just a change in the quality of the stillness. She said she was going to Priya's. She said she'd be home by 3. He nodded. He kept sanding. When she passed him for the side gate, there was a perfume on her he did not recognize. Not the bottle on her bathroom shelf. Something warmer, something deliberate and recent. He noted it the way he noted everything, without comment, without any change in his expression, with the patience of a man who understood the precise difference between a hairline crack and structural failure. They had met at a fundraiser for an after-school engineering program at Johnson C. Smith 11 years ago. Danielle had been bright and certain and beautiful in a way that felt almost architectural, deliberate proportions, every element placed with clear intention. She had asked him what he did, and when he told her, she said, "So you figure out what holds things up?" He had said yes, and she had smiled like she meant it, and he had believed her. He was not by nature a careless man. She had been the one exception, and he had built an entire marriage inside the space that carelessness created. For years, she had been warm in a way that made him generous with his doubt, and generosity with doubt was the one thing he had given her that she had fully used. The second phone, the one registered to his holding company, kept in the breast pocket of his jacket for 4 years without Danielle ever once asking about it, vibrated twice at 11:15. He finished the joint he was working on before checking it. A message from Calvin. 2 numbers, a confirmation code, and a balance figure that had grown considerably since last quarter. He looked at it for 3 seconds and slipped it back into his pocket. His contractor's license was up for renewal in January. There was a permit review on the Garrison Boulevard project the following Tuesday. And inside the fire-rated safe behind the custom bookshelf he had built into the north wall of his home office, a safe whose combination he had changed 11 months ago. The week he found the previous combination written on a sticky note tucked inside Danielle's jewelry box while retrieving an earring she'd asked him to grab. There was a folder he had been building quietly and without hurry. At 11:47, his regular phone rang. The number was not saved. He recognized it immediately. Simone. He let it ring once. Then he answered. She was speaking before he could say anything. She said she knew he hadn't fully believed her the first time. She said she understood why. She said she needed 15 minutes and she had something in her hand she needed him to see with his own eyes, and she was already 9 minutes away. He told her where he was. Simone came through the side gate 7 minutes later with a manila envelope under one arm and her phone in the other hand, and she had the look of a woman who had made a decision she could not undo and had finally stopped wishing she hadn't made it. She was 3 years younger than Danielle and different from her in every way that mattered. Where Danielle performed warmth, Simone simply had it. It came out in blunt honesty and a preference for uncomfortable truth over comfortable silence. Marcus had always respected her. That was also why he had not fully believed her 18 months ago, because believing her required dismantling everything he thought he had assembled correctly. She set the envelope on the porch railing without sitting. She said, Trevor Holt runs 2 LLCs. He's been booking rooms at the Ballantyne Marriott 12 times in 11 months. She laid a printed credit card statement across the railing. The card is linked to an account Danielle set up under a name variation. Danielle Renee, her middle name. She asked me to forward a statement 6 months ago. I kept the login. He picked up the statement. 12 transactions. 11 months. The most recent charge was 9 days ago. A Tuesday, the same Tuesday he had stayed late reviewing the Garrison permit files. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved with the same deliberate calm that defined everything else he did. He photographed the statement front and back with his personal phone and forwarded both images to Patricia's office before he set it down. He was a structural engineer. He understood load paths. He understood that when something was going to fail, the failure followed the path of least support. He had known for nearly a year that something in his marriage was unsupported at its core. He had been waiting with great patience for the full geometry to present itself. He asked Simone if there was more. She opened the envelope. He spent the next 40 minutes on the back porch going through what she had assembled. Hotel charge records spanning 11 months. A secondary email account under a name close enough to Danielle's to pass a quick glance. A screenshot from Trevor Holt's Instagram. A charity dinner in September. Danielle in the background wearing a dress Marcus had never seen, standing close enough to Holt that the arrangement required no interpretation. And a text thread Simone had seen on Danielle's unlocked phone during a Sunday dinner 2 weeks earlier, while Danielle was still in the kitchen. 6 words. 6 more weeks. Then it's done. He walked everything inside and went to his home office. He unlocked the fire-rated safe. The combination he had changed 11 months ago, the same week he found the old one in the jewelry box, and pulled out the folder he had been maintaining since February. 14 months of bank records from their joint accounts, 19 withdrawals averaging $3,300 each, $63,400 total, routed to an account in the name Danielle Renee. He had identified the account in February and had never disrupted it, because he understood that one piece of evidence was not a case. A case required time and repetition, and documentation assembled in the correct sequence. He now had all 3. He cross-referenced the hotel charge dates against the withdrawal dates. 9 of the 12 hotel visits had a corresponding transfer within 4 days, at amounts that matched the Ballantyne Marriott's standard room rates within a margin that was not coincidental. She had been planning this for 14 months. She had no idea that the quiet man she had been methodically robbing had been watching with the same patience he gave every structure he built, from the foundation out. He opened a new folder on his desktop. He named it simply Web versus Web. He moved everything into it and backed it to the cloud and to the encrypted external drive he kept behind the spare tire in his truck. Then he picked up his phone. "Patricia," he said quietly, "I'm ready to move." Patricia Gaines had practiced family law in Charlotte for 26 years and had built the kind of reputation that did not require advertising. She sat across from Marcus in her Dilworth office 2 days later, reading the folder page by page with the methodical attention he gave structural drawings. And when she finished, she set it down and looked at him the way a building inspector looks at a structure when the numbers don't match the visible condition. "Marital waste," she said. 63,000 in documented transfers puts us there automatically under North Carolina statute. We can also argue dissipation of marital assets with intent to defraud. And depending on what her attorney tries to do with the disclosure process, there may be a separate fraud claim worth pursuing. She studied him over the top of her glasses. "Which brings us to your full financial picture." He placed the second folder on her desk. She opened it. She read without speaking for 5 full minutes. When she looked up, she removed her glasses entirely and said, "Mr. Webb, your wife has been trying to rob a man she does not actually know." He said, "I know." She said, "She is going to understand that very clearly, very soon." 3 days passed. Thursday evening, Marcus drove to Grier Heights and parked in front of the house where his grandmother had built most of the man he had become. The porch light was already on. It was always on by 5:30 because Cora, May's younger sister, was 77 years old and still kept the schedule May had set 40 years ago. She met him at the door and studied his face for a moment with the particular attentiveness of a woman who had watched this family carry its weight across many decades. And then she said, one word, "I knew." She made him coffee he didn't need and stood at the counter and told him she had seen Danielle at a restaurant on Independence Boulevard 2 Decembers ago with a tall man in a good suit. She had filed it under colleagues and moved on. She did the same in January. By the spring of the following year, she had been ready to say something. And then Danielle had hosted Easter dinner with such gracious and untroubled composure that Cora had talked herself out of her own eyes. She sat across from him and placed her hand over his and said, "Your grandmother used to tell me, a lie has to move fast, because if it slows down, it becomes a fact. The patient man just follows the footprints." She held his gaze. "You were patient, Marcus. She would have been proud of how you waited." He stayed for an hour. On his way out, he drove slowly down Barrington Drive and past the Craftsman bungalow he had bought at a bank auction 9 years ago. $68,000. Renovated entirely by hand over 8 months, rented continuously since. It was the first stone of a foundation that now included 8 others across 4 cities in North Carolina. None of them titled in his personal name, none of them in any name Danielle had ever known to look for. By Friday morning, Calvin had forwarded the forensic summary on Trevor Holt. The picture it assembled was precise and not flattering. Holt's 2 LLCs had posted declining revenue for 17 consecutive months from a commercial flip that had not closed on schedule. His personal Visa carried a balance of $31,400, with 2 missed minimum payments in the preceding year. Calvin had also pulled public court records. Holt had been named as a co-respondent in a Mecklenburg County divorce proceeding 3 years earlier, a case that settled quietly out of court, and he carried a civil judgment from a former business partner. $42,000, satisfied 18 months late. The man who drove a leased Audi and wore a Breitling that Calvin's research identified as a previous generation model had not been looking at Danielle as a future. He had been looking at her as a transaction, and she had not understood that until it was far too late to matter. Neither of them had stopped to ask a single meaningful question about the man they were building their plan across. You didn't need to be a structural engineer to recognize the shape of something already coming down. The following Sunday, Danielle made jerk chicken because it was his favorite, and she asked about the Garrison project, and he answered her with the kind of specific technical detail that made most people's eyes soften at dinner tables. She mentioned a movie she wanted to see. He said sure. He passed the rice and asked about her week, and she gave him 3 truths and 2 careful revisions of the truth. And he tracked all of it with the same neutral and unhurried expression he wore when reviewing load calculations. Thorough, attentive, completely without tell. He cleared the table. He washed the dishes. He dried them and put them away in the correct order. He was not angry. He was precise. Those were entirely different things. On Monday, he met with Denise, Patricia's associate, for 90 minutes to review the documentation sequencing. Denise found a property tax receipt filed under the wrong fiscal year and a date discrepancy in one of Holt's hotel charges that Calvin's team resolved with a single call to the Marriott's billing department. By Tuesday afternoon, all 5 folders were finalized and arranged in the order they would be presented. Marcus drove home and parked in the driveway of the house on Barrington Drive and sat in the truck in the dark for a moment. He thought about May. He thought about the birdhouse in the porch and the deck boards laid on 16-inch centers and the corner joint of the Adirondack chair that was almost finished. He thought about how long he had been building things for the right reasons and for the right people and in the right order. He was ready. The meeting was set for Thursday morning at 11. Patricia had reserved the large conference room at her Dilworth office, a long rectangular room with 8 chairs, a table that had held more papers than conversations, and a wall of windows showing the bare December oaks along the street below. Marcus arrived 20 minutes early. Calvin was already seated at the far end with the bound financial disclosure in front of him. Denise was arranging the 5 labeled folders at the center of the table with the efficient precision of someone who understood that documents placed correctly were the most powerful form of architecture. Simone was there as well. He had not asked her to come. She had called Patricia's office on her own 2 days prior and asked if her presence would be appropriate. Patricia had called Marcus. He had said yes without hesitation. Danielle arrived at 11:05 with her attorney, a man named Garrett, mid-40s, tailored suit, the posture of someone who billed by confidence as much as by the hour. He walked in with the unhurried ease of a man entering a room he already considered his. Danielle followed. She was composed in the way she was always composed when it counted, controlled, presentable, and ready for whatever she believed was coming. She saw Simone, something tightened at the corners of her eyes. A brief, rapid calculation, then she reconstructed her composure and sat down across from her sister without speaking. Garrett opened with a standard recitation of the marital estate as Danielle had disclosed it. The joint account, the vehicle, the house, the retirement contributions, a total figure that was accurate to the last dollar as far as Danielle's knowledge extended. He spoke about equitable distribution with the practiced ease of a man who believed he had done his preparation. He was still speaking when Patricia slid the first folder across the table. Garrett stopped. It contained the complete financial disclosure for Webb Holdings LLC, property valuations, rental income schedules, the investment accounts Calvin managed, the commercial contract, and the trust established in May's maiden name 11 years ago and funded incrementally ever since. The total on the summary sheet at the back was $4,200,000. The room became very quiet. Danielle looked at the folder. Then she looked at Marcus, the first direct look she had aimed at him since she walked in. He held it steadily. He did not change his expression. He gave her the same calm and unhurried neutrality he had been extending to her for 11 months. She had no idea that much was visible in every line of her face. Patricia placed the second folder in front of Garrett. Bank records, 19 transactions, $63,400 over 14 months. Garrett opened it, read 3 pages, and set it down. The third folder followed. Hotel charges, the Instagram screenshot, the secondary email trail, the text thread. Those 6 words. 6 more weeks. Then it's done. Garrett said something about the nature of personal expenditures. Patricia let him finish completely without interruption and then did not address a single thing he had said. Marital waste, she said without any change in her tone. Documented, dated, and cross-referenced to a secondary credit account your client established, without disclosure. We also have the co-respondent's financial history, which we believe the court will find instructive. Danielle's composure began to come apart in the way that well-constructed composure always eventually does. Not all at once, but in visible stages, like a wall whose mortar has been quietly weakening for longer than anyone standing outside it could see. She looked at her sister. Simone looked back at her and said nothing. Danielle looked at Marcus. She said his name. She said she could explain. She said it had been a kind of loneliness she hadn't known how to name, a feeling of disappearing inside a life that had stopped seeing her, and she still, even now, sitting here in this room, Simone said, Danny, quietly, just the name. Danielle stopped. Marcus stood. He reached into the folder he had brought for himself and withdrew one document, the executed commercial contract for the Garrison Boulevard project. $1.8 million, signed 11 days ago. He set it on the table in front of her, not with force, with the specific and measured placement of a man who had been building toward a particular moment and had arrived at it exactly on schedule. He said, "I didn't hide any of this from you. I built it the same way I build everything, quietly, correctly, for the long term. I was going to tell you when the Garrison contract closed." He looked at her without malice and without grief, with the clear and steady composure of a man who had already made his peace with a thing and was now simply closing the door. "You made your decision before I got the chance." He picked up his jacket. He walked out of the conference room and down the hall and through the glass door and out onto the street, where the December air was cold and clean, and the city moved around him in its ordinary noise. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He breathed. He did not look back. 8 months passed like water through a clean channel. The Garrison Boulevard project came in 4 days ahead of schedule and $60,000 under budget, and the developer called Marcus personally to discuss the next phase. By March, Calvin had closed on a 9th property, a duplex in Raleigh that Marcus had been watching for 2 years, and the holding company cleared its first $1 million in annual rental income. Calvin called it conservative. Marcus said foundations were supposed to look that way from the outside. After the separation, he moved into the house on Barrington Drive. Not as a setback, as a return. He had renovated it himself 9 years ago, and it was the place where he had first understood what it meant to begin with something broken and produce something livable and lasting from it, through patience, precise effort. In February, he planted a Japanese maple in the back corner of the yard, and by May it had leafed out in the dark burgundy that only arrived in the full heat of a North Carolina summer. And he sat on the porch he had rebuilt in the first weeks and drank his coffee in the early mornings with the same unhurried deliberateness that had always defined him. Jade came into his life without drama, which was exactly how he would have chosen it. She was a civil engineer at a firm across the city, and they were introduced at a professional association dinner in February by a colleague who thought two people asking the same questions about a rezoning proposal should probably speak directly. She asked good questions and listened to the answers and did not perform a single thing across the 3 hours they sat at that table. She called him the following week with a setback calculation question that turned into a 2-hour conversation about an entirely different project. By April, they were having dinner. She asked what he was building next. He said he wasn't entirely sure yet, but he was thinking about it carefully. She said she liked that answer, and she meant it, and he believed her, and this time that belief did not make him careless. He heard about Danielle the way he heard about most things, without seeking it. Calvin mentioned in passing that the asset recovery had concluded, $31,000 returned as part of the settlement, the filing reclassified in the court record. Simone told him, in the efficient and unemotional way she delivered information, that Danielle was in marketing at a property management company in Concord. Trevor Holt had dissolved one of his LLCs that spring. He had relocated to Greenville. A business journal mentioned his name once in connection with a failed development and 2 investors pursuing claims, and then it did not appear again. Simone said she and Danielle were not in contact. She said it as a fact without asking for a response. Marcus did not press it. Some things settled into the shape they were always going to take. On a Tuesday morning in June, he was in the yard pressing seedlings into the soil. Along the south fence, bell peppers, Roma tomatoes, a row of basil. When Jade came through the gate with 2 coffees and the newspaper she still received in print because she said screens made the morning feel provisional, she sat on the back steps and read without talking, and the Japanese maple threw a clean shadow across the corner of the yard where the grass was thinnest. And the morning was already warm in the way Charlotte mornings go warm before the day is fully committed to itself. He pressed the last seedling in and stood and looked at what he had planted, and he thought about his grandmother and the birdhouse she had made him slow down for, and he thought about the porch and the deck, boards in the chair with the sanded corner joint, and he thought about all the things he had built, quietly and correctly and without hurry, and he thought about how long it had taken and how much it had cost and how completely it had been worth it. And that was the last thing he thought before Jade said something about the paper and he turned around. Some things were worth the patience to build right. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out two more for you that I think you'll really like.